Welcome to Herbally Yours, an adventure into the world of natural medicine. Here is your host, Dr. Ellen Kamai, the natural nurse who will help you take the leap to ultimate wellness.
And greetings. Thank you so much for joining me, Ellen Kamai, the natural nurse, for another edition of Herbally Yours, right here on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. Herbally Yours brings you the latest information about the many facets in the world of natural living. Today, I am so happy to have on board as our guest, Dr. Ken Redcross. Dr. Redcross earned his medical degree from Columbia Presbyterian Medical Center in New York, specializing in internal medicine. He also is the founder of the first full-service concierge personalized medical practices in the United States. His book, Bond, the 4 Cornerstones of a Lasting and Caring Relationship with Your Doctor, underscores the importance of having a good relationship with your doctor for better health, which is especially important in all times of the year, but we'll talk a little bit about the flu season as well. So Dr. Redcross can be found at drredcross.com, Twitter at drredcross, or Facebook at facebook.com Ken Redcross MD. So thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Redcross.
No, thank you so much for having me on, Ellen. I am the one that's excited here to be on with the natural nurse. We speak the same language, so I am very excited to be on with you.
And, you know, Dr. Redcross, I want to explore first what you're talking about, because I bet a lot of our listeners can relate to not really having a great relationship with their doctor. In fact, many times if you're in a group, you're seen by someone else every day. And I have to say, as a nurse who's been in this profession since 1973, I became a nurse, the doctor is used to touch and smell literally the patients. Now, the doctors are in the corner of the room, I'm sorry to say, at the computer screen, glancing over their shoulder, if you're lucky, for 2 seconds at the patient, and trying to find the codes to input, which they can't find, so they're aggravating. I mean, the whole thing is a disaster.
You know, it is, Ellen. You've hit the nail right on the head. You know, I guess I'm a little bit of a throwback, because I remember when I first went into my career, Ellen, I thought I was going to have time with patients. I thought I was going to be able to build those lasting relationships. Those are things that were important to me. And to your point, healthcare has been changing so much over the past few years. So I've been in practice for almost 20 years or so. And what I started to do back in 2007, I started to document those things that were important to me for the patient-doctor relationship and bond, and more importantly, what was important for patients, what made them happy. And in doing that, and in putting my book together over the past, almost over a decade actually, I found 4 things, Ellen, that were important. The first one was trust. The second was respect. The third thing was empathy. And the fourth thing, which is incredibly important, was communication. And that's one of those things you start to see that kind of falls off when you really look at where healthcare is going now. And I think that's what the problem is.
Well, you know, I think there's a lot of pressure on doctors. We can't really blame them. But since so much now seems to only be focused on, like, doing your report correctly, how long does the typical MD, especially working in a clinic that takes, let's say, Medicare or those other plans, how long are you supposed to be with each patient?
Well, look, when the appointments are made, they're supposed to be 15-minute slots, which I tell you is nowhere near enough time, Ellen, to really, as I like to say, get into the soul of the patient. It's not enough time. But on average, patients are getting about 7.5 minutes of the doctor's time. This was a study that was done with internal medicine physicians in general. But the point is, if you can imagine, what's happening is that healthcare is starting to be more based on volume than it should be based on more value. And that's where we have that disconnect again. And patients, unfortunately, are feeling it. They're screaming out. And so that's why when I came out with this book, I was excited because I got a lot of discussion back and forth between doctors and patients to figure out how can we create that bond again that's been proven so elusive.
Well, This is true. Sort of like, let's say Marcus Welby, MD, right? I mean,
right.
he had, and even, I'm old, quite a bit older than you, but my pediatrician, when I was a little girl, used to come to the house.
Right.
Come to the house. And then my mother usually invited him for a snack and tea or coffee, after seeing me in the house. And that's disappeared.
It's funny. I told you before, I am very much a throwback. So if everyone could be transported here over to my office, you'd see I have a little black bag because I still do make house calls to some of my patients as well. And once again, there's nothing better than a house call going to the actual place where your patient resides. And like you said, usually there's a beverage such as tea and coffee or a small meal there as well. But once again, it just helps can create that bond that's so important to health and healing.
And why is it important, in your opinion, to health and healing? What made you come to that determination? Do they teach anything about patient-client relationship in medical school, or did you just come to, develop this on your own?
Things were different back then. When I was doing my training, as you mentioned, I trained at Columbia. We were very, very busy. It was a beautiful program to learn, and we learned to work, right? And at that time, I think healthcare was just starting to turn a little bit. We started to get a lot of the organizations that came in that started to judge doctors, to where there'd be these online surveys, and then bigger companies came in and put more pressure on physicians. So for me, it took me a while, actually, to recognize that there was something missing in that relationship that I wanted with the patients. I felt I wasn't given enough to patients. So it was something that I kind of teased out over the years and realized what was making me the happiest and making the patients the happiest is when I was able to give them the time that they deserve. When I was able to actually get into their lives and figure out, we can deal with this diabetes, but is there a problem with your child as well? Are you having an issue because there are some issues at school that are really bothering you and that's affecting your blood sugar from the cortisol levels and so forth. So it allowed me to get a better relationship when I kind of pulled back a little and said, guys, I have to change the way I deliver care. I have to change my practice model, not only for just myself, for professional happiness, but more importantly, like I said, for the patients to be happy.
Well, let me ask you this. You, of course, you're in Manhattan, right? You're in New York?
Yeah, I'm in Westchester area.
Westchester. So what about, do you do, let's say, Skype consultations for people who aren't in your area, or is it strictly, one-to-one personally?
It varies. Some of my patients, I have a lot of my patients are a little bit middle-aged or older, so they're not necessarily as comfortable on the Skype platform. But then I do have a couple of millennials who would just totally live by that, and it'd be a lot easier than actually seeing me in that way. And then most of the patients who I have in my concierge sort of practice anyhow have my cell phone, or they can text or email me. So I think the most important thing is providing three things: access, convenience, and time. The time that everybody wants. Because everybody, at the end of the day, patients just want to be heard. Even if we have a disagreement on, let's see which medication they want to start, if we want to hold off on medication or go a little bit more of your approach on the more holistic side of healing, you have to have the time. And then one of the cornerstones that I mentioned earlier, the communication back and forth. And that's something that takes a little bit of time to get that. But when you get it, it is absolutely the best feeling in the world.
So how long, when you're with a patient, do you usually spend with them?
That can also vary. So I'll have some of my patients are those who may be on the entertainment side of things. So they're traveling here and there. So I can go see them at the hotel. And while I see them at the hotel, I may be with them for an hour. Some of my patients who are in the area that I go see, once again, we're never, ever rushed. So very rarely is it less than, I would say, 30 minutes. And that's probably the lowest amount of time because, when we get there, to your point, we really are. They know I'm a big tea fan. So we really are getting tea, or some of them will have a meal made when we get there. So at this point, we're not only just patient doctor, but we're kind of friends, and more importantly, I think it should become like family. And when you get that sort of thing, I think you have better healthcare outcomes as well, and that's the name of the game, to make sure we're getting better healthcare outcomes, right?
So I want to remind you, our listeners, you're listening to Herbally Yours on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm Ellen Kamai, the natural nurse, and my guest today is Dr. Kenneth Redcross, MD, and we're talking about personalized medicine, which he really features in his practice. And thank you so much again for joining us today, Dr. Redcross. Now, let's talk a little bit about, the flu, because first of all, is the flu only a winter illness?
That's a great question there, because when did we start talking about it? We started talking about flu around the fall, right? October all the way out into May. And the reason why is because this particular virus thrives in weather like this, dry, cool air. So you're right. It is something that is around the fall, winter time when these things sort of change, which is the reason why the statistics show it kind of dissipates around May and June to when we don't have to deal with it again until the fall.
Oh, so it's not as prevalent in the summer. Although people get colds and things like that, they just call them summer colds, but it looks like the same deal.
Yeah, they're different. So they're different viruses. That's probably a little bit more of the adenovirus, Coxsackie virus, some of the other common rhinovirus. That's not influenza. Influenza in particular tends to be the fall and the winter months. Now, last year, if you recall, we had a very rough season. It portended a bad outcome already because Australia the year before had cases almost, I think it was almost late August. And so there we knew that something a little bit stronger was coming and a little bit earlier than normal. And so that's why last year's season was so bad. This year's season is starting to peak a little. So I want to make sure that everybody is cognizant that even though we're through the holidays, we still have to make sure that we're flu ready also.
Yes, it's important. Now, of course, in what we might call mainstream medicine, modern medicine today, obviously the big push, the word prevention seems to be linked to two items. One would be mammographies, and the other is vaccinations of all sorts. It seems like that is what the word prevention means in conventional medicine.
Right. And then it's tough. It's challenging. A lot of my patients have come to me because they know while I'm Western trained that I have openness to Eastern ideals and other ways of healing than just kind of the knee-jerk that we see within our healthcare system. So you're right. It's something that a lot of patients are wondering about, especially during the flu season. One of the things I talk to patients about, and I talk to them about other alternatives, especially within the beginning of the flu season, they can make a big difference. Now, this is unique for me because, as I mentioned, I'm Western trained, but it wasn't until I went to California where I had patients that during the flu season were getting better as far as their symptoms. So the symptoms of the flu tend to be fever, body aches, chills. Well, they started talking to me about a homeopathic remedy called oscillococcinum. Now, I hadn't heard of it. Now, I don't know if you have, Ellen, but oscillococcinum
So I have been using that for over 40 years, okay?
Oh, my gosh.
My own children, who are now 40 and 43, have never had an antibiotic and have always had natural remedies, as well as all my patients, and I've been in practice for 35 years. So, yes, I am really well familiar with it. It's amazing how well it works and how inexpensive it is.
It is, and not only that, just like you, it's funny, I am preaching to the converted because my kids, I have twins, they're 13, they also do not do antibiotics either, and they've done well. They know how oscillococcinum works. We know that it decreases the symptoms of the flu. We know it's safe for kids that are 2 years of age and older, and when we know that there's studies behind it. That's the thing that's important for me. That's when I kind of put my Western doctor hat on. 63% of people had a clear improvement in their symptoms. So that's when things are important. That's when it's time for me to say, I never learned about oscillococcinum in med school, but guess what, guys? It works. And there's a lot of other things, as you know, during this flu season with all your training that can make a big difference that are better than antibiotics in this case.
Well, that's really interesting because especially as you just talked about the fact that flu is linked to viruses and antibiotics are not useful against viruses. But we do need to take a little break right here. And I'd like you to know, listeners, that you are listening to Herbally Yours on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. Listen live or online at nccradio.org or on iHeartRadio. For more information on today's guest or topic, email us at whpc@ncc.edu. Stay tuned to Herbally Yours, and Dr. Redcross will be right back.
They'll challenge your authority.
Seatbelt on.
They'll try to break your will. They'll push you to the edge of your sanity. Because that's what kids do. But this car is your territory, not theirs. Defend it. Who makes the payments? Who cleans it? Who drives it? You do. That's who. And in here, your word is law. So when you say you won't move until everyone's buckled up, you won't budge an inch. Until you hear that click. Never give up until they buckle up. A message from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Ad Council. For more information, visit safercar.gov/kidsbuckleup.
And welcome back once again to Herbally Yours right here on WHPC, and of course we're so happy to also be heard on iHeartRadio, and we love to hear from you. Get in touch by visiting naturalnurse.com, and you can email us. You could join our newsletter. No fee whatsoever. Just go to the bottom left-hand corner on the front page at Natural Nurse, put in your email, and you're in. You'll get all kinds of announcements about our online seminars and lectures, which go on every single day. And through them, you could actually become a registered herbalist with the American Herbalist Guild. And many of our classes and workshops also give CE credits. Those are professional training credits to people who have a license, such as nurses and chiropractors, naturopathic physicians, midwives, massage therapists, acupuncturists, all of them. But you don't have to be that. You can just take the classes for your own knowledge. So just go to naturalnurse.com, look at calendar, and you'll find out about all those things. Today, we're so happy to have as our guest Dr. Redcross. We've introduced him, Kenneth Redcross, and he is certainly a special doctor. And you can find him on his website as well. And also, you can also get his book. So you can find him at drredcross.com. So thank you so much for joining us. You were just talking about a fascinating word. Some of our listeners may know that word, and some may not. It is a funny word, oxalococcinum.
Exactly. We were talking about that, everyone, because I was just sharing how even as a physician myself, I get educated. And I was educated probably 10 years ago on something that my patients were getting better with during the flu season, and it was oxalococcinum, which is homeopathic, and has been shown to decrease body aches, chills, and fever. And so it was nice for me to be able to offer something different to my patients who were pretty adamant about not taking any medications or even, differences of opinion as far as vaccines and so forth. But I really enjoyed being able to learn and share something that is a little bit closer to the earth as well.
Yes, so much so. But oxalococcinum is interesting because where they got that name from is the homeopathic researcher who developed it actually was watching viruses under a microscope, and they oscillate. Mm-hmm. And he found a particular, and of course, when we're talking about homeopathy, we're going into another whole realm of energy medicine. He found that the oscillations of those viruses actually was able to be stopped at a particular frequency, and that's how it is made. Believe it or not, the starting part of that is duck liver, even though there's no duck liver actually in those capsules. So that's a big topic for another day. But be that as it may, you see it worked.
It does, and that's the great thing. And like I said, once again, it gets back to that important thing, Ellen, right? Listening to your patients, learning from your patients, and that C again, communication, and trusting each other, trusting that I do my due diligence and make sure that everything is safe as well. So I love that kind of interaction.
So just because somebody's interested in natural, I imagine it's how do you feel about them also if they feel good about it, and how do you feel about the data linking not getting the flu with getting the vaccine? Because sometimes I don't think that data is so strong. How do you feel about that?
Well, I'll tell you this, and this is another challenge, right? So last year's flu vaccine ended up being about 40% effective, which is pretty good when we're talking about effectiveness of the vaccine. Now, one thing we do know, we know that the flu vaccine does decrease the severity of the flu. Should you actually see the particular strain that's there, we know that there is a benefit. Something else that we unfortunately had to learn last year is that we lost over 180 children last year, and 80% of those children were not vaccinated. Now, it could be multifactorial. Some of these kids were already, unfortunately, ill or had chronic illnesses as well. So it's something that's important to get in and have a discussion with your doctor to find out, is the flu vaccine best for you? If you're over age 65, diabetic, so, immune system that's compromised, then it's something that we definitely should really consider. But if you're a young millennial, while the flu vaccine could be of benefit, but it is someone to come in and have a discussion with your doctor about, and not necessarily just ward off the vaccine without a good discussion.
So it's something that you are open to, but you don't say people have to get it, but you encourage them to get it. What about people who get very adverse effects, such as arthritic tendencies, or even come down with the flu after getting the flu vaccine?
Well, that's a two-part issue there, because that's when I have to make sure that I explain that the flu vaccine is a killed inactivated virus. And so what's probably happened, two things. Number one, when something is injected into your body kind of wakes up and says, hold on here. What is this that's injected? I need to start mounting antibodies just in case. So yeah, you can get some chills and some symptoms that feel like it. But one thing you're not getting, luckily, is the flu itself. And so that's the important thing to kind of think about. Now, the other thing that's also important is there was always this issue of whether a person with an egg allergy could get the flu vaccine. And so the CDC's done a lot of research on that, and they still say that if you've had an egg allergy, you should still consider your vaccine in the doctor's office, but no longer do they say you have to wait an hour anymore. And the only reason why you can't get it is if you had an anaphylactic reaction to eggs. That's the bigger kind of contraindication. So there's a lot of education going along. And don't forget, we haven't had the flu vaccine that long, so I think the CDC is still trying to get it right.
Right, and like you said, Dr. Redcross, it's sort of being developed each year depending on the strain that they're tracking in a particular year. And that actually varies. It's not like the flu is the flu is the flu. So I know that they're having some issues with, you track a flu this year and then something else shows up next year, but yet the vaccine is based on the one from before.
Yeah, and the flu is a very smart and pesky virus. It's able to mutate. In other words, it's able to change itself even throughout the season. So last year's strain, which was so aggressive, was called the H3N2 strain. Whenever we see that strain in the community, Ellen, it tends to be very aggressive. Now, this year's strain predominantly is the H1N1 strain, which was the swine flu strain that we dealt with back in 2009 or so. So that's why it's a little bit of a weaker season, because we're ready for it. We've seen it, and we've been able to kind of get the vaccine better tailored towards it. So I'm interested to see how the vaccine numbers are going to be towards the end of the season, to see how the CDC did this year.
Well, I'd like to remind you, listeners, you are listening to Herbally Yours on the Voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm Ellen Kamai, the natural nurse. And my guest today is physician Dr. Ken Redcross, who has a concierge practice, which he talked to us about, how personal it is with individuals, and he's also sharing some information about flu. Well, Dr. Redcross, you brought up oxalicoxinum. What other natural remedies, either to prepare for the flu, maybe build your immune system to not even get it in the first place, would you recommend?
One that I love, and a lot of people already know about it. I remember years ago, no one did, and everyone knows about black elderberry extract, it seems. As I mentioned a couple of times today, I'm a big fan of tea, so I'd like to get the elderberry extract in tea. We know there's some wonderful studies that shows that not only does it boost our immune system, but it's been shown in some to actually decrease the severity of the flu. So that's something that's important to add. There's also another, remedy you could think of called butterbur. Now, butterbur is fascinating because we know that, look, it has anti-inflammatory properties. That's kind of where the magic lies with that. That's why you get patients who get benefit as far as their headaches. We know that it helps as far as decrease some of the secretions that you can get, like in the bronchial area. And last but not least, I like holy basil also. Holy basil is a wonderful natural expectorant. And when I talked to a lot of mothers, they even had some of their pediatricians who would use the holy basil as far as drops for earaches for kids. Now, I'm an internist, so I don't see children anymore, but a lot of mothers would swear by holy basil for the drops as well for their children.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about some of those, like elderberry. There is such great science. If there is any physician saying this has not been studied, not only has it been studied, but the mechanism of action has been elucidated to a very great depth. And one of the reasons elderberry is so effective is that it interferes with viruses' ability to duplicate. So while it is not an antibiotic, it is not an antiviral or even an antibacterial, and it does not do much, in fact, to stimulate the immune system, even though that's on lots of bottles. What it really does is inhibit viral duplication. So it's so exciting to learn that with almost zero adverse effects. I mean, anyone could be allergic to a berry. That's possible.
Sure. But you're right, and you don't see it as much with black elderberry. So I'm glad that you feel good about that as well, especially with your background. And so it's exciting to once again offer something a little bit different that doesn't require me to write a prescription, which is what I try to avoid.
Right. And then again, it's wonderful if you are a physician, and you can, because there is a point where medications are indicated, and I really think integrative medicine and prudent medicine includes pharmaceuticals, but it's just that they are overused, and they're used as a first line sometimes when we don't have to go to something that might have that kind of adverse effect.
No, you're right. And to your point about being a value of Western medicine, there's certain disease states where no matter what we talk about, it is the best data that we have is from Western medicine, such as diabetes, congestive heart failure. Those are things where we know that Western medicine is superior, at least for the initial standardized therapy best practices. So you're right. There is absolutely a role for Western medicine as well.
And that's why physicians like yourself, who have continued to study about the efficacy, safety, and really preferability in terms of risk-benefit ratio as well as cost of natural remedies as a first line of intervention, but we have conventional pharmaceuticals when necessary in your little black bag as well.
Right, exactly.
So I want to thank you so much for being our guest today on Herbally Yours, Dr. Redcross. Butterbur was new to me. I use butterbur in my practice most often, I would say, for allergies rather than colds and flus. So I'm going to look into it for that, because it does seem to be good in terms of dealing with mucus. And why would you use butterbur? Is that what you have found?
And that's the exact thing. And that's pretty much the exact same thing. It's been good, at least to help with some of the mucus buildup that you sometimes get as well, especially in the bronchial tree. And then there's also a good indication for headaches, which is something that you can sometimes get during the flu season also. So butterbur, when you learn a little more and see that, you'll see that a lot of people use it just for the headaches.
I am going to look into that. That's why I love doing Herbally Yours, because, there's no end to learning. Is there, Dr. Redcross?
Absolutely not. I learn each and every day. I'm learning from you today, too, so I love it.
And me from you, so, we always do that. And I want to thank you again, and thank you, listeners, for tuning into Herbally Yours, produced in the studios of 90.3 WHPC, Nassau Community College, Garden City, New York. For further information, email WHPC@ncc.edu. This is your host, Ellen Kamai at naturalnurse.com, inviting you to join us next week for another edition of Herbally Yours. Until then, stay healthy.